This is Spirit in Motion.
Hey, welcome to our podcast, Spirit in Motion. Today, we have a very special episode for you. We are sitting down with our first guest ever on the podcast, 2 seasons. We've never had a guest before. This is our first guest. He's our friend, Isaac Witty. Isaac has been a stand-up comedian for a little over 20 years and has been on Prairie Home Companion, on NPR, David Letterman, Conan. He's opened for Jim Gaffigan and Amy Schumer. And more important than all of that, Whit, you and Isaac have had a relationship for years.
And we've known each other for like 32 years. So we grew up together, met probably, 13 years old or so. And so I'm really excited to have him on and really not just to talk about the comedy career, although that'll be interesting, but to really hear the story, Isaac's incredible story of kind of journey away from God and then supernatural, miraculous coming back to God.
Yeah. So Isaac, you grew up not dissimilar to the way Whit and I grew up, just
right.
Our fathers being pastors, your parents were pastors for a season. But why don't you get us started with growing up in the church and then
right.
making a decision?
Well, it's a tricky thing, like to say that I did, of course, I believed in God as a kid like that. And I had an experience at kids camp and youth camp. But beyond that, I really very much was borrowing my parents' relationship with God. There were brief touches when my relationship with God was tangible and there, but it was touch and go. And it never was on my own. I never did have a natural fascination about God. Even though I was surrounded by it.
You were very in the church community.
Yeah, I very much was. A difficult thing about being a pastor's kid is that I'm not saying at all that I was like, oh, I saw this hypocrisy. I'm not saying that at all because I didn't. What I did see was the business side of church. That was something that as I got older, I would be like, yeah, there's Christians. It's a business just like any other business. And that's kind of how I saw it, really, unfortunately.
By the time, and I remember this, by the time we were, 19, 20, somewhere early in our 20s, there was a comedy club that opened in Tulsa. I still remember, I think
you were at the first
opening night.
You were there the first time I ever did stand-up,
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you and Chris Munch might have been there.
Well, we saw the guy.
We saw the guy
Biff.
from Back to the Future.
What? Yeah,
we sat on the front row the first week.
Yeah, at the local Tulsa Comedy Club. And I remember being like, oh, this is fun. But for Isaac, I think there was like more going on. I mean, you were really intrigued with that whole world.
Yeah, because starting in like the 8th grade, I always watched Evening at the Improv and those types of shows. I would record them and watch them over and over and over again. It was kind of like I started learning about stand-up comedy as a young kid. And when a comedy club opened in Tulsa, I took that as like, well, I'm gonna really try this. And I was 20 years old. It was May of 1996.
Okay.
And I went to my first open mic, and I kind of never looked back. I mean, I became a house MC there 2 or 3 months after I did my first open mic. I enjoyed it from the very beginning. I wasn't good at it from the very beginning, but it was something you learn how to do. And I went wholeheartedly for it. So
obviously, you are more than into it. I mean, you at what point were you like, I'm going to do this?
I would say after that first open mic, I decided like I'm for this is what I want to do with my life.
Wow,
this is for sure it.
It was somewhere in that period, I think, that we started to lose touch a little bit, to some degree,
right?
And your life kind of started heading more in that, you're more at that club, hanging out over there and building relationships in that world, which might have been the first time. And maybe, obviously you went to high school.
Right.
Did you go to Owasso?
I went to Owasso.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you ended up at a large public school, but then this kind of starts leading you to maybe like a new community.
For the first time in my life, I was running into people that I really, really, like they wanted to do the same thing I wanted to do.
Right.
And everybody drank and smoked. And at first I didn't, but then it turned into like, hey, when you work a week here, you get 2 free drinks on every night you work. On those weeks, I would be drinking every night of the week. I'm working at the club. And then it turned into like I'd be going down there, sneaking down there on weeks I'm not, and drinking too. And it was, it was nothing crazy compared to what a lot of people do at that age.
Why did you say sneaking?
Because it's certainly not something I would have told Whit George about. I wouldn't have called and told my parents about it.
They didn't know.
No.
You were 21?
I was 20.
I
was 20, and
wow.
yeah, I would go to church every Sunday and Wednesday night.
Oh my gosh!
I even worked here there sometime.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
I even worked here, and I had this secret life. And I looked at it back then. I remember thinking of it like, this is my life over here with the way I was raised, and then I go over here to be who I really am.
Wow, that's interesting.
It was this big revelation that I had when I realized, like, everybody, all these people I know at church, they want to be doing these things, but they don't because it's not right, but they don't do it because they feel guilty. When there's people over here, they just do whatever they want. They don't feel guilty about it. It's awesome, you don't have to feel. I remember saying that to you one time. I don't know if you remember. I remember saying to people at church, like, there's these people and they just live their life and they never feel guilty about doing these things that we're told we shouldn't.
Drinking, smoking,
chasing girls, yeah. So, that was a big revelation to me.
So then from there you move, how did the career progress?
Then it turned into, I started getting some work out of town every now and then. I started to get to know other comedians, and that's when a friend of mine moved to Minneapolis, and I remember he called and he told me how we can get on stage only this amount of time in Tulsa. Like if we go up to Minneapolis, we can be on stage every night of the week. There's 2 A rooms and all these B rooms in the surrounding areas. So I went up there and I was just, not only was I able to get on stage every night of the week, I was also able to instantly have all these friends and instantly be connected to all these people that were doing the same thing I was. And I just I completed my task of leaving God behind when I moved to Minneapolis.
Wow.
Because of course I quit going to church. I didn't know any Christians up there, which at the time still seemed pretty harmless.
What was it like when you told your parents who were involved in the church and your whole family, I'm leaving?
Well, I think they didn't have any choice but to say, all right. I remember my dad saying, like, I hope you don't go up there and live with a girl or something like that. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. I would never do something that crazy.
You were how old?
23. I was 23 years old.
Wow.
Yeah, that's where I moved up to Minneapolis and instantly got a lot of work. I instantly got representation. I really fit in and I felt like I was really doing something with my life.
Do you remember when you left Whit?
Not specifically. I remember, like I said, I just remember the kind of slow separation between, it really began with the comedy, because when we went to the comedy club together the night that it opened, I mean, we were hanging out pretty regularly. Yeah. But it was after that, you could just, his world and my world just kind of separated. And so I knew he had moved up to Minneapolis, but I mean, it wasn't like, we didn't really keep in touch, and texting wasn't really much of a thing, and we probably weren't going to call each other up on the phone.
There was
and
no
just say,
social media.
How you doing?
Yeah.
So we kind of lost touch. I mean, so details in the story. Isaac's sister Angie worked at Church on the Move for a long time, and so I would kind of know what was happening in Isaac's life through my relationship with Angie. She would say, "Hey, here's what's happening, and here's how he's doing," or whatever. So so you move up to Minneapolis. Career starts to take off. Like describe that whole kind of, because I here's what I remember. I remember, and I'm trying to think of which came first. Was it Letterman that came first?
Yeah, Letterman came first.
I remember.
No, actually, it was Prairie Home Companion.
That's what I was going to say. I thought it was Prairie Home.
Yeah.
Because I think I was listening to that with Heather And then you come on. And I don't know if I had been told or if I just heard you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is Isaac. I know.
Yeah.
And it was surreal to me.
That was surreal. That really was surreal, just to have been a fan of Garrison Keillor. That was a really crazy thing that happened, getting on that show. That was the first thing that happened. And then maybe a year after that, maybe 2 years after that, I was booked on Letterman. Yeah.
So this was how many years into kind of your stand-up
I was
pursuit?
7 years in when I did Letterman.
Wow.
That's not that long.
No.
Not that, no. I was 27 years old when I did Letterman.
What did that feel like?
It was, it's a surreal situation. Back then, pre-internet, what you would do is they'd go, hey, I think you're right for the show. Why don't you make a tape for me? And then you'd make a tape, you put it in the post office and go to the post and mail it off to New York City. And then they would go, yeah, I saw your tape. I like this joke and this joke and this joke. Send me another set with those 3 jokes and
Other things.
And 2 minutes of other stuff, And then on the 3rd tape, it was like, that's the one. Okay, now wait.
Oh.
That's how it was back then.
So you're just kind of standby.
Yeah.
And then how long is it from the call to you're going to do the show? Is it like week of that you're finding out you're going to do it?
I got a phone call on Wednesday to shoot the show on Thursday.
Wow.
Which would air on Friday. And it's just one of those things, like no matter when's, for me, I wish it would have happened to me, I don't know, a couple of years later. Because I feel like I would have been way more ready. But I mean, I did fine on the show and everything. I
remember watching it.
But I do remember after that set, like it was not as fulfilling as I thought it would be.
Right.
Not nearly, because back then Letterman was the creme de la creme.
Mm.
Like that's what all comedians were like. That's the show you really want to get on. And I had done it and it went the way it went and it was fine. And I got a bunch of colleges from it, but it really didn't hit the spot like I thought it would. And it certainly didn't launch me or anything like that. But yeah, it was empty, kind of an empty feeling. I remember making a conscious effort. I'm just gonna party for a little while.
Wow.
It's funny the way you'll make horrible decisions because of little circumstances. We drank all the time. We're big drinkers, but that's all I ever did. I remember saying to a fellow comedian friend, like, I would never do anything harder because I make my living off my brain. And if I do hard drugs, that's going to affect my brain. And I don't want to get into that. That's a mess. I see what people end up doing. And I remember I was working a comedy club called the Comic Strip in El Paso, Texas. I remember we went to Mexico. We went into Mexico this one time. And we were in Mexico and this guy, he whispers to my friend and my friend says to me, do you want to do cocaine? And I remember thinking, well, I'm in Mexico.
Yeah.
I justified it by that, I'm in Mexico. And that began a 15-year love affair.
Wow. Where
I truly learned for the first time, like, that you cannot serve 2 masters. Because from that day forward, I had a real problem with cocaine. I mean, I remember the first time I did it, I remember thinking, oh, I understand why people give their whole life to this. This is it was an incredible feeling. And I wanted, all I could think about was, when am I going to do that next?
Wow.
So
you were in Minneapolis and then at a certain point you moved to New York.
Yeah, I moved to New York. Probably soon. Yeah. Soon after I did Letterman, I moved to New York and, things weren't going well there. Like, cause really when you move to, New York, nobody knows who you are. I don't know. I never clicked all that well with New York audiences, to be honest. They like a lot of clubs there. They like the what do you do for a living? Where are you from? And that's not what I do at all.
Crowd work.
They like crowd work and a lot of clubs in New York. Not to say that that's all of what comedians do, but that's the one. A lot of comedians do that, and that's just not what I am. And I was a little too weird for some rooms, and I wasn't weird enough for the downtown rooms. And then I started getting colleges because I was on Letterman when I was living in New York. And that's when my cocaine use went crazy. There were a lot of mornings I woke up and I'd spent $500 on coke the night before, like that type of use. And I was completely out of control, and I started to gain a reputation in the comedy world for a guy whose life was out of control.
Wow.
I was always the guy with a crazy story. One time, while crossing the street in New York, I fell down in the street and a van ran over my arms.
For real?
For real, yeah.
This is not on purpose.
No, like it was just because I was a wild man, and I took great pride in like I've got all these killer stories, you know.
Wait, hold on. Did you break your arm?
No, I'm indestructible.
Oh.
I had just purchased $200 worth of cocaine. I was in Hell's Kitchen. If you've ever been to Hell's Kitchen,
Yep.
It's like establishment, sidewalk, street.
Yeah.
And it's all very packed in there, real tight. And I was excited to leave to go do drugs. So as I left the establishment, it was like I walked out of the bar. I tripped over some garbage into the street. I fell down in the street. And as I fell, a van ran over my hand and my arm. It was like, gedunk, 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 gedunk. Things like that happen to me all the time.
Did you just get up and go do drugs?
Yeah. My friend Davey said, we got to get you to the hospital. I was like, no. Yeah. I had crazy stories. That's why I very much had a reputation of like, oh man, if only that guy wasn't such an addict. I mean, I knew people would say that type of thing about me all the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people don't know that the college scene is pretty big for comics,
Right.
Especially primarily clean comics. You can make a living, like a really good living.
Yeah, I had 2 really good years. I think like two really good years doing colleges. That I think I got a couple NACA conferences and
That's the organization that kind of
National
schedules
Association of Collegiate Activities. That's what that is. And because I did a couple of those conferences and did really well, I got a lot of college work, and that's
So if I'm right, mathematically, you can make $1,000, $1,500 doing one show
right
at a college. You're just going to turn right around and spend it on cocaine.
I was horrible with my money. I would at all times have about $10,000 in my checking account. That's what I didn't invest any of it. I just partied a lot. Yeah, it was a lot of partying. And here's a really crazy thing. I remember because I was a clean comedian and I was from the church world, I would still every once in a while work churches.
Right.
That's the
people who knew your parents or the connection there.
Yeah. People that knew that I was on Letterman and that I come from the world of churches and that I can do an hour of clean. I would, it was ridiculous. Hypocritical.
That's really what a church wants, right?
Yeah.
Like this guy's on Letterman. And I mean, I would imagine they're like, and he's a Christian. Here we go.
Why did you do clean comedy?
That was, I always looked at that as something I did for my parents. And it turned out to be something that was a good idea in the long run. But yeah, I always did clean comedy. I always did that. And I liked the boundaries of the rules of writing clean as opposed to how I'd see other people like, it would, not to say all dirty comedy isn't funny, but I don't know. It's easy to get lazy when you're dirty. And I liked dealing in the parameters of that.
So spiritual life, obviously addiction to cocaine, but then was there a conscious moment for you where you're just like, I don't believe any of that anymore. I'm done.
Well, I didn't want to talk about it. I used to always, when people would ask me like, where do I stand with God or what do I think of God? I would always say, I went to church a lot as a kid and I don't want to think about it. Like I was so tired of it. I didn't remember fondly those those days. I looked at Christians as those who go to bed at 9:00 every night.
There's nothing wrong with going to bed at 9.
Right.
Well, they don't do any cocaine. There's a very, very slim chance, But yeah, I throughout my whole life, it's been a identity crisis. Like, who am I? What is this that? Yeah, what is it that I do that defines me? And when as a professional comedian that makes their living from just comedy, I mean, you really do. Like I would be 29 years old sitting at an airport bar with somebody who's a millionaire, and I'm chatting with them, and they're impressed with what I do.
Yeah.
Like you do get that. It's a pretty alluring thing, and that's a tough thing about the arts, because anybody in any way in the arts, I'd imagine with music or whatever, like that's really easy to allow yourself to think that you're going somewhere when really you're not doing much.
Wow.
Yeah.
When did you get Conan?
Conan was like a last gasp of my career. I was I cashed in a favor through a friend of mine who's a celebrity, and I sent him an email. I sent TJ Miller an email, and I was like, can you put a good word in for me?
Because to back it up a little bit, we talked about this, but when you were in New York and then you spent some time in LA as well,
right?
You were working with comics who we know now,
right?
But we didn't know them before,
right?
Yeah. So a lot of these guys are now.
They were just friends of mine. I mean, it doesn't take any effort to have the people that I know. I mean, they were just guys I worked with.
Wow.
Daniel Tosh. I worked with Daniel Tosh when he worked in Tulsa. I was friends with Amy Schumer when I lived in New York. Yeah, there's a lot of people that I'm on a friendly basis with, because that's just where
it's the world.
That's just the world of comedy
and the craft. And there's probably a certain understanding that what it takes to do what I do in a sense.
Yeah, there's a real handshake amongst stand-up comics. I mean, we know how to talk to each other. We have a lot in common that civilians don't.
So so you get Conan. I actually didn't see you on Conan, and I didn't even know till maybe this last week that you were ever on Conan. Okay, so what year was that?
That was like 7 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, 2000.
So you have this gap between Letterman and
there was probably 8-10 years.
Wow.
You're working.
Yeah, I was working
fairly steady professionally.
Fairly steady, and there would be times when, like during the 2008 housing crisis, I ended up having to move back to Tulsa and work at the Olive Garden. And there were several times when I had to move back to Tulsa because I ran out of money. When you're just an addict like I was, it was. Of course, I'd never admitted that, but yeah, that was the reason why I constantly had to move back home. I was always moving back home.
The world and culture are trying to communicate what they want you to believe about themselves.
Right.
And comics see through it and say what is actually happening.
Yeah.
That seems really potentially dangerous when it comes to God. Especially if you've been into any behind the scenes stuff with the church and there's anything that rubs you the wrong way. Do you relate to that, or was that an experience with you at that time?
I could see what you mean, because you look at yourself as I'm this blatant truth teller about I always call it the way it is, and I like to rub people the wrong way with my opinions. So yeah, I remember people would say like, well, you were raised in church, you're a Christian, right? I would go, I am not a Christian.
Oh, really?
I would say I am not, because I was like, might as well be truthful about it.
Right.
Like I was not in any way Christ-like, so I was always honest with my friends about that. Like, yeah, I'm not.
Around this season, I remember, I don't exactly remember the conversation, but through Angie and your parents,
right.
Your mom occasionally, hey, pray for Isaac or whatever. And so I knew things weren't good, You know, I obviously didn't know the inner workings of what was really going on in your life. And we didn't have the relationship at the time. I could just pick up the phone and call you and be like, hey, what's up? And it would have been weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember you coming back a couple of times and I'd see you, whether at a, you know, I think there was like a church league basketball game I bumped into you at, or at church itself. And it was just always so, I remember thinking, in fact, I remember having conversations probably with Angie, just saying, that's not the Isaac I remember. Your whole personality is so, it seemed different to me, and it was awkward, and I could tell you were uncomfortable and I was uncomfortable because I didn't know what you thought of me or anything that I was involved in. And so it was just a really different time. Yeah. That whole kind of era. So was there, you know, from your perspective, were things getting kind of progressively darker and darker for you?
Yeah, because as you get older, I mean, your whole identity is based on a house of cards that you know is going to fall any moment. Like that. That's something I remember about all those years, is a constant feeling of the clock, of like just knowing that there is a timer that I know is going to go off pretty soon, and I know that there's a clock to all this, and I know it's going to fall apart, and I know it's not going to be pretty. Wow. I would grasp for normality. Like I try when I was 30 years old, like this is like, I would just do whatever was right in front of me. Right. There was never any plan.
The other day when we were talking, I was just asking you, what are some significant points of your story? One of them had to do with comedian Mitch Hedberg.
Well, that was the first sign I remember because I idolized Mitch Hedberg. I thought the world of him. I remember the first time I ever saw his half-hour special. I remember thinking, that's what I want to be. You know, like that. I was enamored with Mitch Hedberg, and then I actually, through circumstances, I got to work with Mitch Hedberg like 3 times, and I was not a good friend. We were like good acquaintances, and I was hanging out with Mitch Hedberg like a week and a half before he died. And I remember that was just such a crushing blow, like, because Mitch was the guy that all of us party animal comics, we really looked up to, because we like, you can do really amazing on stage and you can party like crazy. And that's what Mitch Hedberg represented to me. And when he died in, gosh, I guess that was like 06-ish, 05.
From a drug overdose.
It was a crushing blow.
And then you stopped doing drugs.
You would think. You would think. The other thing that really was just the time when you really think I would have stopped doing drugs this is probably 6 years ago. I was playing a comedy club. I was playing this one-nighter, a Black Bear Casino near Duluth, Minnesota, and I stopped by my dealer's place to get some Adderall, and he was like, I've got this Coke too. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll take that too. So I took it, and I went up and I did the show, went up to my room to do this Coke. And all of a sudden I'm like, this doesn't feel like Coke. And that's when it occurred to me, this guy also deals heroin. And I've never had a tolerance to heroin because I don't do heroin. I was always an upper guy. And I went down to the blackjack table thinking I could ride it out. And I tried to play and keep up with it. When I would win, I'd forget to take my winnings. When I would lose, I'd forget to put more money out there. And the next thing I remember was a paramedic in my face saying, he's back. So, and you would think after that, having to go to the emergency room, you would think that would be the time when it's like, I have to get serious. But I wasn't at all. I wasn't ready. I don't know.
It would have been, my side of it, Adam, from this point was like, I'm hearing from Angie, things are happening. Isaac's not in a good place. Yeah. But I also knew like he was so closed off.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
She, we didn't have that conversation, but she would, or be around when your parents would. And she was just like, he wants nothing to, I'm like, Isaac, I'm asking, Angie, what does he say? How does he respond? Yeah. Whatever. And it's just like, he doesn't want to talk about it with. And so, it was almost like you had this friend who was just kind of inaccessible over here, just kind of off, totally closed off to everything that you believe. Cynical. And the things that I thought, man, this could, I thought his life could be different, but there was no opening to even talk about any of that. I mean, and Angie really, I think one of the key things for her was that she didn't really say much to you. Her and Sam were just kind to you.
Right. I mean, I remember one time Angie saying, like, I get the feeling that you're doing some really dangerous things, and I just really hope that you'll be careful. And I remember she told me that one Christmas, and I remember feeling very uncomfortable with that because I hated the idea that I was inconveniencing anyone by them worrying about me, because I can take care of myself, and you don't need to worry about me. This is going to be fine. That was always my ego thing. I didn't want anybody to think about me, because I'm not worried about you. Don't worry about me. I'll be over here. But I was falling apart. I was disintegrating for sure.
I remember the day, maybe 3-4 years ago, I was at work and Angie got a text.
Yeah.
Maybe you were there too, Whit.
Yeah, I remember
And
it.
she goes, "Oh my gosh, Isaac is going to open for Amy Schumer at a big show."
Yeah.
Up in Minnesota.
Yeah. Yeah.
10,000 people, something like that.
Yeah. Long story short, I ended up opening for my old friend Amy Schumer at this 10,000 seat venue where the Timberwolves play in Minneapolis. And I remember it was having high hopes for it and thinking, this is going to be neat. Maybe this will lead to other things. And it was, up until that point, I'd always had in my head, like, my life is a complete mess, but at least when I get on stage, I can always do well. At least there's always that. And that show could not have possibly gone worse. I mean, it was an extremely crushing blow to bomb in front of 10,000 people when your whole identity, the only thing you have left in your mind is that I'm good at this thing. And then, like, you go up in front of the biggest crowd you've ever gone up in front of, and it was humiliating. And I went on a huge bender from the money I made from that show. I remember I she paid me $3,000 to bail after 5 minutes. And when I got that money, all I did was just self-medicate to forget who I am. And that led to, that was a horrible blow. That pretty much made it to where, okay, now I'm not even a comedian. So therefore, what am I? I'm just a self-destructive person. And that's kind of when I kind of left comedy in a way. Like, in a way, I would do shows here and there. Like if certain clubs called, I'd work them and things would be fine. But there was always that nagging thing in the back of my head that I'm not what they think I am.
Wow.
And that's when I just took a regular job and I started working full time as a sales guy at this job in Minneapolis. And that's what leads us to the worst part, which was one day I couldn't find any Adderall.
I was just going to say, you say you couldn't find it. No one had any for you to buy.
No one had any for me to buy. Like, I checked everywhere, but I could find meth. And that was the first day that I did meth. And I thought it'd just be this one time because I can't find any Adderall. No big deal.
And you'd never done it before?
No, never done meth before. And it wasn't even like the first time I ever did coke. Well, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like, oh man, this is amazing. It was more like, I hate this. But then I'd always go back and then it turned into like every Sunday, then it turned into every Sunday and Wednesday. And over the next 2 years, I had a huge spiral where immense, like unending, never-ending depression, like horrible depression.
I didn't know that.
Oh, meth brings you the worst depression. And it's a cycle of like, you're always high, recuperating from being high. And then if you try to not smoke meth, and after you're physically back, mentally, you're so depressed for weeks to where you're like, let's just do it again so I can go back
to get
up.
away from, wow.
Yeah. And that's where,
wow.
So it turned into like heavy meth addiction for 2 years. I very much identify with your story. Heavy porn addiction, like big time. That's why I heavily get into porn. Porn and meth are, they're synonymous. But I would just sit in my apartment and cry because I could not stop. That was as bad as it. It just got really bad.
So what do you think, like during this, like, do you just feel like there's no way out? Does God enter the picture? Are you thinking maybe I'll turn to Christ?
No, I didn't. It made me distance more from my family. And the hand of God was on me at that time.
Wow.
I know now by looking back, because it was like I was one by one losing options. And as horrible as that felt back then, I eventually got boxed in to where I had nowhere else to go but to go to contact my family.
Wow.
And one day I called Angie, my sister, and I said, I think I'm suicidal. I said, I don't think I'm going to actually do it, but I think about it a lot.
I remember that day.
Yeah.
Because I think that was the day she texted me or called me, one of the two. I still remember driving through the parking lot right outside this building.
Yeah.
When I heard from her, she said, Whit, you need to pray. Isaac's in a really bad way. She'd mentioned suicide.
Yeah.
And I remember just praying for you. And it doesn't happen often, but I just had this strong sense in the way that I was to pray, like to pray really boldly about you. I knew, like it wasn't just, oh Lord Jesus, help Isaac. I was like, I know that I need to pray. Like I was praying, like these really kind of authoritative prayers. Like I'm calling him out of the kingdom of darkness and into the kingdom of light. Because I knew there was just something in me that felt that the need to pray that boldly that day.
Yeah.
And so, but I didn't know, what any of that, I mean, it just kind of felt like the culmination of this downward spiral that I'd been hearing about for, a decade or more. So you end up, coming to Tulsa because?
Well, Angie said, because my thing back then was like, I know what the answer is. It's antidepressants. In my mind at that time, I was like, if I could just get on antidepressants, this would make it so I could get a job and I could support myself again. And Angie was like, we'll get you antidepressants. We'll get you therapy. And she said, our only connections are back here. It's at this place called Cornerstone Counseling. And I instantly said, I don't want to hear anything about God. I don't want, let them know. I'm not going to talk about that.
Right.
I know for sure that that's not the answer.
Yeah.
Antidepressants, that's the answer.
Wow.
So I went back to Tulsa.
2019, 18?
2018. This would have been like September of 2018.
Yep.
I actually even ended up getting antidepressants and going back to Minneapolis.
Yes.
And then
yes.
And then like a week after that, I drove back to Tulsa.
Yeah.
Because things just weren't getting, that's what it was. I was going to take the antidepressants, but not the counseling.
Right.
And that didn't work. And
wow.
I remember going to these sessions with Dr. Neiman, and he didn't try to push anything God related to me. He just tried to, be constructive, and I was so numb. And I remember I could barely understand what he was saying. I was so numb. Here's the really crazy thing. Like I had always gotten away from come to Tulsa in a way like those last 2 years because like I don't know anybody with meth there. Good. I need to get away from it. This is how I can take a vacation from that. Sure enough, the guy that I go to hang out with, there he is smoking meth. And then I've got a meth connection in Tulsa. So then I'm going to these I'm talking to a therapist and taking antidepressants and living at my parents' place. And I went to 2 sessions with Dr. Neiman where I'm crying and, things, I don't see any hope. And then on my 3rd time to see Dr. Neiman, you guys have seen Dr. Neiman. Does he ever do that thing to you where it'll be like, he knows that you need to say something, but he doesn't know what it is, so he'll just sit there and not talk?
Yeah.
I was on my 3rd session with Dr. Neiman, and I remember just staring up at the wall thinking like, I wish he would ask me a question or talk or something like that. And then it just came out of my mouth. I just go, I've been smoking meth for the last 2 years. And then that's when he presented how about this? How about you stay for 3 months and we'll do counseling and we'll do this and that. And he pitched that idea. And I was against it because I didn't want Angie and Sam to have to pay that much money.
Because they were offering.
They were paying for all of this.
And I just, on our side of it, I remember Angie saying, I'm sure you remember this, Whit. Man, it's crazy. I'm emotional, Isaac, just because I'm so thankful that you're here. But I remember Angie saying, I am willing to sacrifice anything for my brother.
Yeah.
And I remember her specifically saying, I will sacrifice finances for him.
Yeah.
And that's what they were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, they showed me who Jesus is with that. And yeah, they were with open arms saying like, we'll pay whatever it takes to make this happen. And I didn't want to accept because I knew that would cost thousands of dollars and sessions and all of this stuff. And I talked to my mom and she said, I think you should take him up on it. And I was like, I'm not doing it. And then I never was a big pot guy, but I'd actually started smoking pot every once in a while just to numb myself from from feeling anything. And I remember going down to the Fontana parking lot in December of 2018, and I had a 1-hitter and I was smoking. I took like 2 hits of pot on that 1-hitter, and I remember I called Hazelton again, like thinking like I'm going to do it my way. And
what's Hazelton?
Hazelton is like this. It's a secular rehab place, and I called Hazelton thinking this will be a good alternative. Hazelton was like $30,000 for 3 months, and that's when it occurred to me like this is the only option I have. This is the only option I can, because I cannot go back to Minneapolis because I have no money. I sat in that car in that parking lot and I cried, and there was some type of heart change that happened when I said to myself, I said, okay, I'll do it. Like I will accept help. And there was something spiritual happened to me in that moment when even though God wasn't necessarily maybe it was only in the back of my mind, there was something very spiritual that happened in that moment when I decided that my way wasn't going to work.
Wow.
And I got in the car and I decided I was just going to go back over to Angie and Sam's. They were at work. I was just going to hang out by myself at their place alone. And I was sitting in the car at a stoplight, and on the radio was on, and it was some type of news thing, like at the top of the hour or something like that. And in the news, it said something about children being hurt or something like that. And in my moment of being angry at God, I said, you want to hear the really spiritual prayer that I said that led to my experience with God? I won't say the actual thing. I said, this was my prayer. I said, how the F could you let that happen? That was my prayer. And suddenly an explosion occurred. An explosion in my mind and in my heart. And there was just to the point where I knew, like I knew that God was there with me. So it was like, I don't know. Everyone comes to God differently. And that's how I did it. It was like a list of grievances I had with God. It was, I don't want to read the Bible. I don't want to go to church. I don't want to talk to my family about God. I don't want to do this. I don't want to pray. And it was, you don't have to, you don't have to, you don't have to, you don't have to. And it was like, all you have to do is give up what you're wanting and come to me, and the rest will work itself out. There was it was, it was like, I had a talk with God that day, and I've never felt the same since. And that's what happened.
Wow.
Does that make sense, though?
Yeah. I'm just emotion and all of that, because I just think he was waiting that whole time for that moment in that parking lot, just for your heart, Revelation, Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And I think about how long he knocks, like how long he's willing, just the patience and long suffering, the steadfast love. In fact, Psalm 107 says, oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love, like this continuing pursuit, no matter how far we run. And he's just waiting for you to go, okay. I remember hearing after that from Angie, just this wit, I think he's had an experience with God.
Yeah.
And she relayed the prayer, and I guess, whatever story you'd told her, basically that story back, she'd relay that to me. And I remember it was a couple of weeks later, I saw you at church and I was preaching and we bumped into each other in the lobby, or I saw you. And I just remember thinking, like, we had this conversation and immediately I could tell something was different. And of course I knew the story and some of what was happening, but I remember, I think, just sitting down in the lobby and just being like, okay, so are you like a Christian now? And you're like, yeah, I think I am.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was surreal. And I remember thinking, it's the old Isaac. I felt like I was talking to you again,
right? Instead
of this kind of medicated caricature of you that I had come to see over the last, 10, 15 years or so.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was like you were back in some way.
Right. You affected my story in a big way too, because I remember I remember watching a couple of weeks before all of that happened. I remember watching you you preaching, and in the back of my mind, being cynical, I was like, well, I know the real Whit, because I remember years ago Whit telling me that he has a problem with porn.
Right.
So this is all fake too. And then right after I'm thinking that, you Eminem'd me. And you
just an 8 Mile reference for everybody, in case you're wondering.
Eminem does that. Like, he goes, my mom is like that. She is an alcoholic. All these bad things. So you can't it's
wow.
And that really affected me. That
because he talked about,
he was open about it. He was open about the thing that I thought was a secret.
Yeah.
And that really affected me.
Wow.
Well, yesterday when the three of us were talking on the phone, we were talking about how, especially when I was a kid, you would hear stories of people being addicted to drugs and maybe coming back and being like, that's their story. That's not my story. Because I've never been addicted to drugs. But yesterday when we were talking about that, what you said,
yeah, I think somewhere early on, Isaac, you can remind me, I was talking to you about the prodigal son, the story of, and that was really the story that kind of changed my life. because if you're not familiar with the story of the prodigal son, it's in Luke 15, and it's Jesus telling the story of, one son. There was a father who had two sons. One runs away, lives a really wild life, and then ends up being kind of completely destitute and broken and has nowhere to go but to return home.
Right.
But then there's this older brother who was really dutiful. And I'd never, the way I'd always thought about the story was just, don't be the younger brother. We didn't really talk about the older brother. But this older brother was this guy who was kind of, neither one of them, in the story, the father is God the Father. That's who Jesus is making this person to, represent. And neither one of them really loved the father that much. I never saw that till much later in life, that I was the one who was dutiful, who did outwardly a lot of the right things, but inwardly was living for myself.
Yeah.
And I remember having a conversation with you going, we're the same. Yeah. I just didn't have the guts to do all the stuff that you did. It doesn't mean I didn't ever want to. It just means I didn't have that wasn't my story. I tried to control God, not by living wild and free and running away from him, but by being very good and getting him in my debt so that he'd have to do the things that I wanted him to do. But in both cases, we're just trying to...
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
How long ago was it that you had that experience with God in your car?
In December, that will be... So it's like 2.5 years ago.
So what happened? What has happened since then?
All of the things that I said that I didn't want to do, they slowly became things that I did want to do.
That list with God.
But the truth is, that I didn't have to do those things. But because I wasn't forced to or told I had to, it made me want to do it. Like, here's what I did. Like, when I first became a Christian, I had no interest in reading the Bible, but I would binge on sermons. That'd be my message to people that were anywhere near my situation, is that God will meet you wherever you are.
Wow.
Because I had so many conditions. I was willing to give my heart, but I had a lot of strings attached to it, and God had no problem with that.
Wow.
He said, I can work with that. That's not you. Like you don't want to read the Bible? All right. Well, hey, I know you will. But that's probably, all of that fell into place. Yeah, for the first month I became a Christian, I would cry tears of joy because I was free.
I didn't know that.
Wow.
I did. You know what's weird? I had I don't know if this makes any sense or not, but this is actually what happened. Like, I had right after Christmas that year, I had shows in Minneapolis to do. So I had to go back up to Minneapolis. And I had to clean up all my stuff. But on that drive up to Minneapolis, I was listening to I was listening to, I think, NPR, and just a little bit of that Beethoven song Ode to Joy started to play. Have you guys ever listened to that and thought of it as my theory is that's a song about God's grace. It does. You can't understand the words to it, but it's when you listen to that song and think of it as you being free. I just remember watching the snow fall on that drive and just crying tears of joy because I was free for the first time, and that I felt like heaven was rejoicing, and I was getting. I got to be at the party too.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow. We were talking today, Isaac, and I was asking you, do you feel since then, 2.5 years, it's not this way with everybody, but I was asking you, like, what's your relationship to drugs and all of that life now? And have you, do you feel the longing to go back there?
It's a miracle. Like, a miracle happened that day. I mean, maybe I buried the headline a little bit there, is that it's a miracle happened, because from that day forward, I never had any desire to smoke meth ever again. It was gone. I've been in this through being in Minneapolis. I've been in the same room briefly. I left soon, right as soon as I saw it. But I've been in the same room as cocaine. It wasn't even close to a temptation. I drank for a little while afterwards because that was one of my conditions with God, and that's gone now too. A miracle happened that day. I don't have any desire to do those things. And
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so the way you kind of conceived of it before was God was basically saying, look, I'll have you if you'll clean up your act and do all this goody two-shoes stuff and live a really boring life that you don't want to live.
Right.
And so that was kind of the hurdle and I think a lot of people are in that same spot where it's like, I don't want to be a Christian because I'm going to be miserable.
It's boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get to do what I want to do.
Yes.
But really, those things that are harmful to you, like drugs and if you're drinking in excess, I mean, nobody is smoking meth after the second week of doing it going, this is so much fun. Nobody is doing that. Everyone's doing it because they're like, I have to do it.
Wow.
You're a slave to it. Nobody is having fun doing hard drugs long term. If you admit that your way doesn't work and his does, those things just fall off. It's not like I ever wake up and go, oh man, part of me kind of misses the days when I had 5 rolls of tinfoil in my backseat. You know, I don't ever think about it.
Wow.
No.
It's amazing.
One of the things I've noticed about you, and we've gotten closer over the last few years since you've been back, is you're just like, when you get into something, you're like all in. It really is similar to even hearing your comedy story, just like all in, move away, get into it. That's been your relationship with Jesus.
Yes. Yeah. It surprises me to say that I get up every morning and I read the Bible and I pray because I want to do it. Isn't that weird?
Yeah. Like, I mean, it is.
Considering.
It is considering.
Yeah. And it's all of the things that every preacher I've ever heard has said about that is totally true. You do feel a huge difference when you dedicate the more time, dedicate a significant amount of time to prayer and reading the Bible. It's all true. It's all true. But yeah, it's who knows where. Right now, you would think on paper, my life still not much of a savings. Live with my mom and dad. I own a house with my mom and dad.
Right.
45 years old. Haven't done comedy due to COVID in a long time, but something's coming, I think.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what's next. So just logistically, Sam and Angie took over a church near Atlanta.
Yeah, now I live in Atlanta.
They're pastoring a church, so your parents and you moved there with them.
Right.
So you guys are there.
Yep. I don't know. I mean, I've been working here and there. I want to do stand up again. I want to keep doing stand up. Me and you have that show tomorrow night.
Sold out 60 tickets.
Sorry, you guys can't go. Yeah. But I look forward to doing more stuff like that. I look forward to opportunities to be able to talk about my story, learn how to tell my story. But yeah, the future's bright.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of our podcast. Spirit in Motion is a podcast from Church on the Move in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For more information, you can go to churchonthemove.com. We'll see you next time.